All right, well, good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in to today's webinar. I'm Sarah Miller. I'm the Vice President of Communications at the Small Business Association of Michigan. We appreciate you taking some time to join us today for what I think is going to be a really exciting conversation. We have invited Lisa Fisher to join us for this webinar on generational communication. Lisa is a trainer, a coach, a speaker, and a consultant, and she has a passion for working with others to achieve their definition of success. So she has a lot of experience. She's a founding investor for Lansing Keller Williams Realty franchise. She is an ambassador for the Lansing Regional Chamber of Commerce, and she is a member of SBAM's Leadership Council. So we've had the pleasure of knowing Lisa for many years now. So Lisa, I have a couple of quick housekeeping items. Um, so as I mentioned, this is being recorded today. If you do have questions, you can ask them and we'll see what we have time for at the end of today's presentation. You'll receive the slides and the recording via email from me either later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. And with that, I'd like to welcome Lisa and turn it over to her for today's webinar. So Lisa, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to share a topic that I feel is near and dear to my heart, being that I have several different generations of my own just in my immediate family in the workplace. A few years ago, pre-pandemic, I was at a networking event. I had a group that was standing around me from attorney to plumber and all different types of industries in between. And they were talking about staffing and how challenging it was to find good people to come and work. Somebody mentioned the term millennial. And I swear, as soon as they were all standing there, it's like they took that giant swig of sour milk. Their faces all wrinkled up, like something was very wrong. And I was intrigued. And my first thought was, well, how many of you have raised the millennials? Uh, but then the second thought was, we need to identify what's going on. What is happening that there's this divide, this stereotype? So I went and I started studying and I put together a program, what I call Bridging the Gap. And it's about being able to work across all generations. And for those of you that can see my hands, it is about closing that gap. And it begins with the communication piece. So if I am a younger generation coming into a workplace, I can't expect everything to be my way. And if I've been in the workplace for a long time, I'm in retirement age or nearing the close, I also can't expect you to always do things my way. We need to have an open mind and communicate and learn, how do we close that gap? And why is this important? 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day. When we start looking at Gen Z, the Gen Z population is shorter and shorter, smaller and smaller. I grew up in DeWitt. When we wanted to go to a restaurant, we had to drive into Lansing because there was nothing in DeWitt. It was not developed nearly the way it is now. And yet now there's so many restaurant options on the one main corner and fewer people to man those. So we have more choices of places to work, less people to fill that gap. And so being able to retain, this is about retention and holding on to our team members, our groups. So let's talk about who are the five generations. When we think about the five generations, you can look at various studies and they can't necessarily agree on the exact birth years. But on this slide, we're going to focus on what are the birth years. Now, I'm going to put a little disclaimer out there. This is research. This is information I'm bringing to you. This doesn't represent stereotypes and how I feel about a certain group. To me, we're all just people, but I'm bringing to you the information that I have found during my research. So the first one that when we think about in the workplace, the five generations in the workplace, those traditionalists, they were born between 1928 and 1945. I've had a class participant say, why do we need to talk about the traditionalists? They're still in the workforce. They only make up 2% of the workforce. Yet that could be your business owner that is coming in to reevaluate what's going on within the organization. It could be an attorney. It could be any type of person that was born within these years that is still involved some way, shape, or form within their organization. When we look down below at the baby boomers, they were born between 1946 and 1964. The thing about the baby boomer generation, they were the largest generation by birth, and recently they were superseded in the workplace because of retirement. So the boomers make up 25% of the workforce as of today when we're speaking. The millennials surpassed them. If we go back up above the line, our Gen Xers were born between 1965 and 1980. Now, again, this is just a representation of birth years. Most people affiliate generations with what is going on, and we're going to learn some more information about that. But the Gen X, they are roughly 33% of our workforce now. Below the line, we go back to the millennials. Generation Y are the millennials. You can see their birth year between 81 and 96. There was a study that came from Purdue Global that indicated 75% of the global workforce in 2025 will be the millennials. Right now, they're 35% of the US population of the workforce. And then our last generation in the workforce is Gen Z. And again, there's studies that are showing that may change some of these date ranges. But when we start thinking about our Gen Z, they moved up to being 5%. When I first started studying this in 2020, they were a very minuscule piece of the workforce, but they have climbed to 5%. So it's important to really recognize who are the generations and how do we communicate with them, but we need to get to know them a little bit. So I want to do a poll, and Sarah's going to pull up a poll for us. Who's in the room? If you want to take a moment, for those of you that are on the chat, based on your birth year, this isn't anonymous, where do you fall into generations? Are you a traditionalist, a boomer, Gen X, a millennial, or a Gen Z? So let's take a moment and please respond to the poll. Thinking just on birth years. And there's a method for my madness here. I often get, well, I'm a baby boomer, but I associate as a millennial, or the other way around, millennial associate as a boomer. Are we seeing any responses come in, Sarah?
Yes, we are. If you cannot see the poll, we are at 58% Gen X and 42% millennials, and that's the representation of our call. So we have a couple people who haven't participated yet, but that's okay. I'll just say, full disclosure, I'm a Gen Xer, so I'll admit my birth year right there. But yeah, so we have the majority of Gen X, but a lot of millennials too.
Fantastic. And you'll hear me, especially when we cover the boomers, I say we a lot because I fall into that tail end of the baby boomers. So there you go. We have our poll results for our Gen X and our millennials here on the call. Thank you so much for being with us. And let's continue to navigate through. Thank you for playing along. Historical events are another item that shape who we are based on the generations. So not only are the historical events important, but also where we were born in that roughly 20-year age span, that span that makes up a generation. So let's take a look at what were some of the historical events that were going on that helped shape the different generations. Our traditionalists had the Great Depression, World War II. Children were seen and not heard. When you think about the Great Depression, how many of you, thinking through with your grandmas or your great grandparents, aunts and uncles that saved their Tupperware dishes or their ice cream dishes to use for Tupperware? They rewashed Ziploc baggies. That's because it was a waste not society. We held on to everything. So these are things that helped shape who they are. When we look at boomers, the Vietnam War, civil rights, Watergate, assassinations of many great people. Now, being that tail end of the boomers, I wasn't glued to the television set when JFK was assassinated, and yet how my parents may have responded to that would influence and shape who I am in that arena. And the same thing with the Gen X, with the AIDS epidemic, Berlin Wall, the computers were introduced. Oh my goodness, if you remember the first computer. I remember talking with a gentleman, his dad was one of the first people in the state of Michigan to have a computer that literally took up a full room. Millennials, we start the Oklahoma bombings, the Y2K. I had a daughter that graduated in the year 2000 when everything was supposed to end, but Columbine shootings, the rise of the internet, all of these things influence and affect how we react, respond, and think about different things as we go, but also our influencers, such as our parents, our grandparents, other areas. And then with Gen Z, they do not know a time without war. And when we think about the Great Recession, Hurricane Katrina, many things that happened during that time frame really influenced. And we've had so many things happen in our world even after this slide was created, but they're all influencing factors. And when we start thinking about not just the rise of the internet, but how much media is coming at us in the news that we're getting, it can make an impact on how we respond. Now, it doesn't mean you won't respond to these things as an individual, as a group. But again, this goes back to what was happening in the eras of these people, of each generation that was taking place, and how did it shape and influence you? I loved being at the polls and voting this year and seeing parents that were bringing small children to lead the way and recognize how important it is to vote, to vote. But again, they're shaping their younger children. The alphas come after Gen Z. When we take a look at the various characteristics of each generation, we're going to highlight a few of them. And again, wherever you research, you're going to find more information. I was sharing with Sarah, I could geek out on this and talk about this for hours because there's just so much that intrigues me. But when we think about the characteristics of the traditionalist, loyalty, respect for authority, value community, family allegiance, traditional values, those are some of the things in addition to what you see on the screen. They strive for financial security, which comes from that Great Depression when there was so much lack. Our boomers are running the local and state and national government. When we think about them, it's been said they have a strong work ethic. They value order. Community is important to them. Spending time with their family is important to them. They want products and services to show their successes. You know, coming from the boomer stage and speaking on my own experience, it was an environment the workaholics was really the term that came with baby boomers. If you weren't working 70, 80 hours, you were part-time. And they were more focused on the number of hours worked and maybe not as focused on the quality of the products and services delivered. And we'll take a look at that when we look at the baby boomers in the workplace. Our Gen X's, they're often referred to as the sandwich generation, caring for elderly parents in addition to raising millennials or younger children. When they look at what they strive for, they are more independent. They want that work-life balance. They're entrepreneurial, ethnic, they are more diverse. but they expect ongoing feedback, immediate ongoing feedback. And if you remember, right, we've introduced technology, instant gratification, more things are available at our fingertips. Our millennials, they're very comfortable using technology. They're socially conscious, empathetic, progressive, very values driven. They're more culturally and racially tolerant. Yeah, with the internet and the more use we have, our attention spans are starting to get shorter and shorter. Very achievement oriented, everybody wins mindset of millennials. Optimistic, I love that word. And our Gen Z, the Gen Zs are under a lot of pressure to succeed. They thrive on the small bits of information. It's really important for them to be able to research and find things, but it's right at their fingertips. They value diversity, value authenticity. And again, that instant gratification is really important. One study showed that our Gen Zs are more likely to own and operate their own businesses. So those are some of the characteristics, but their use of communication. I always, when I'm struggling using my cell phone, I phone a grandchild, say, "Can you help me out here? I need a little help," because they're just everything comes so easy to them when it comes to the lines of technology, because that's how they were raised. That's what they were born with, were the various computers, resources right at their fingertips. I love that they thrive on small bits of information is one of the things that came up with. I was recently speaking to a woman about training, and she wants to develop a TikTok methodology, if you will, for training, because everybody has that smaller attention span. So how does she come in and work with her team members in sound bites, in smaller bits of information where you've got their attention and their focus, instead of into something that's going to consume a lot of time? But our Gen Zs, they're also going to have to solve a large economic crisis. So there's a lot riding on their futures. Having a few of the characteristics, let's think about the Gen Zs, or excuse me, the generations at work. I have just in my children, my grandchildren, I have 4 of the 5 generations in the workplace. And not that they're my only study group, right? But it's funny to observe and watch their interactions to different things. And I have a couple of daughters that are millennials. They're in a work environment that they feel a little bit stuck. They're tolerating some bad behavior from bosses or just a toxic work environment. And maybe it's not all toxic, but I'll just work through it, is their philosophy. I'm just going to stick here. I'm going to work through it. I feel a little stuck, is some of the language that I hear sometimes. But when I think of my Gen Z grandchildren that are in the workplace, if the work environment is not conducive to what they like, they leave. One of my granddaughters was a barista, and she was a manager and working with her team, and the business owner was talking down to them, calling them lazy. you know they didn't use the word stupid, but they might as well have when they were talking to them. And my granddaughter said, "That's enough." And she was advocating for her team. And she went into the owner's little office area that they had and said, we're not going to allow you to speak to us that way anymore. It's belittling. We're not comfortable with it, but she was advocating for herself and for the people that she was leading. Now, remember, this is a story of a younger person, and I'm only getting one side of it, but needless to say, my granddaughter no longer works there. I'm not sure if it was she was let go or that she quit, but she was standing up for herself and her team members about not being treated poorly. And we need to keep that in mind when we're looking at that retention piece, when we're bringing new people into the workforce. When we go back to think about some of the things that we've heard about different generations that are stereotypical, that they're lazy, they're this, they're that, we have to consider what kind of a background did they come from, right? Because if we're nurturing our children, our Gen Zs, our millennials, and we're going into the feelings, the talk of feelings and emotions, which was not common for the baby boomers. You pulled up your bootstraps and you moved on. But we can't have somebody coming into the workforce that came from a nurturing environment at home, and then all of a sudden they come into this place that's totally opposite and feel under attack or just a different culture than what they're used to. So again, it becomes about bridging that gap, and how do we get to a place where we're open-minded, we can communicate, we can solve problems, we can use empathy to recognize facts and feelings, that we have clear expectations when we sign on about what is the work, what is the job, what is the role, what targets am I looking to hit. Quite often when we look at hiring somebody and we're bringing them into the workforce, we have a job description. So that's what they're applying for. And yet there's also things that we can agree on, regardless of what generation that you're from. We may agree on what are the goals, what are the main objectives, what are the outcomes. We might disagree on how do we get there, because I have to tell you, I have learned a lot from the different generations as I communicate with, ask them questions, learn more about them. And my way's not always the right way. Their way's not always the right way. There might be things that they didn't think about that we need to take into consideration. And yet we all bring value, skills, knowledge, experience, non-experience. We all bring something to the table, but let's start with what can we agree on and how do we communicate with each other. Oftentimes it's just finding something that we have in common, a love for sports, for pets, so that we can open up and have a conversation that we can both understand. When we start thinking about the traditionalists, when we have bringing them into the workplace, they generally have really good interpersonal skills. They believe promotions, raises, and recognition should come from job tenure. So when we start thinking about a promotion and where we're going with it, the longer you were here, you were next in line. And that's not necessarily how things will come into play. But when they think about the work ethic, and I think that's one that's really important, is work ethic, because 5 different generations have 5 different points of views, let alone the individualism of each generation. But knowing that if I am working for a traditionalist, timeliness, productivity, not necessarily drawing attention to myself or the organization, yet getting things done, those are important things to know. Working in a manufacturing company, the business owner stepped in because the general manager retired. The younger generation, the millennials that are working for him, needed to understand how to communicate with him in a way that was respectful, that got results and were able to get their point across. 65% of baby boomers will work past the age of 65. Even though there's 10,000 that are retiring every day, many of them will work past 65. Some people will say that it's because they didn't set up for their futures. So financially, they're not ready to retire. And yet, for some people, they just enjoy what they're doing. And they have a lot of information because generally baby boomers have stuck around for longevity into a career. I've been here for a long time. I've got 30 years into the company. When they get ready to retire, we need to extract some of those things that they just do. Maybe it's not written in a standard operating procedure manual, but they have a lot of knowledge that we can benefit and glean from, a way that they handled a specific customer or client, what they know about each individual person. They value work ethic as measured in number of hours. Remember, I said if I wasn't working 70, 80 hours a week, I was a part timer. But teamwork is critical to the success, and relationships are very important. When we think about the baby boomers that are in the workplace, they're ones that are retiring are getting replaced by younger generations. And depending on what industry you're in, being able to communicate with somebody that's older than you, sometimes there's a negative connotation that comes along with it. So building relationship and rapport and getting to understand the values of each generation is important. I remember taking over a role as a young manager, and I had to lead people that were older than I was, and it wasn't received very well. So it became about people first, talking to them, getting to know who they are, building trust with them. That became very important. One of the studies that I read that were referenced in the sheet under characteristics, the highest percent of startup and founders are the Gen X at 55%. And I found that really interesting because another study said that Gen Zs will be entrepreneurial, self-employed type of people. So again, do your research, look into some of the statistics. Yet our Gen Xers, they're all about flexibility, working smarter, not harder. I've heard that term many times and pretty envious of it, quite, if you ask me. But they want open communication regardless of their position. They want to be informed. They build loyalty on a person, not a company. You've heard before that people don't leave their jobs, they leave their bosses. Our Gen Xers are loyal to people that can help them achieve goals. But they're very focused on that time management, that work-life balance. How do I get things done and get to spend time with my family? I don't want to be married to my job. I had an awesome email come in from a woman that is a millennial. And she was sharing with me that she was always called lazy as a millennial. And she was trying to figure out how to work with her Gen Z employees. And she found out just because you're sweeping or you see something, a trash that needs to be emptied, they may not necessarily take the initiative to do it. So don't make assumptions about other people. But she also went on to share that because, the different generations are not going to stay later or, be married to their jobs, that there were some things that she implemented and put in place. Lunch breaks were important. Closing the business on time was important. There were different things that she was able to implement. And with our Gen X running that work-life balance, being able to find that win for both places, all age groups. The work's getting done. I'm involved. I'm committed. but we're moving forward. In the early 90s, I was part of a task force that met for our Tri-County, Ingham, Eaton, Clinton County area. And this was before 1992, so it was between 90 and 91. I'm drawing a blank on the year. In this study, what we found was that the longevity, people working for long years at an organization was not going to happen anymore. They were going to 4 years, 5 years, and then move on to something else. And during that time, the study was predominantly rated on the fact that employers were not going to be offering as many benefits, pensions were not going to be a thing. Yet that long ago, we predicted that people were not going to be at jobs for long periods of times, like those boomers, 30 years in one place and retiring. And some of you, if you're business owners or if you're in the hiring role, you might see a list of places that people worked, because we're seeing that come to fruition. The millennials, the Gen X, many of them are not staying for those long periods. They're coming in, they're coming out. And it's not necessarily the money for the Gen Xers moving into a different location. It's about the people. It's about the fulfillment. It's going to a place where I want to belong. It starts with Gen X, but moves down through some of those generations, because again, we're shaped by our experiences and our environment. And I also value, and I'm not just saying this because I do coaching and training and go into organizations, but yeah, our younger generations, they look for coaching, they look for training. Personal growth and development is important to them. Our millennials, they're looking for fulfillment, leadership. They're looking for strong leaders. John Maxwell talks about the law of the lid. John Maxwell is a leadership guru, has written tons of books on leadership. And in his 21 irrefutable laws of leadership, he talks about the law of the lid. If you have a leader on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 7 is a leader. That's as far as you're going to grow. Yet, if you have a leader that is a 10, you will be able to move farther up in the organization, improve your leadership skills and your personal growth and development. Positive reinforcement. As we looked at the characteristics of a millennial, it was everybody wins. And I hear the participant trophy in tons of conversations, again, kind of like that sour milk, depend on who you are, that curled lip. Yet it's important for them, and we need to understand what is important with the different generations. Now, from a human resource perspective, as a leader, you're not going to ask somebody how old they are. We're going to observe, we're going to learn, we're going to ask questions. What do they like in a workplace? And they work to live, not live to work. There was an article that I read, Jen Twenge wrote, Millennials' distrust of the man and the government stems from bad economy and violence that's happened over the years. Again, introducing the technology, the more access to news, looking at some of these things. Things were difficult in the 70s too. It just wasn't in the news and talked about so much. So we're getting a different point of view there. Gen Zs, they are collaborative, creative, self-directed. They can process information at lightning speed. And because of their access to all of the technology, says they're going to be smarter. So our Gen Zs in the workplace, they expect employers to provide formal training. They want to know what they're supposed to do. Once they have that, you're going to find they're going to want to work more to themselves. We've started seeing the whole work at home thing before the pandemic. There were many people that wanted to work from home and have a flex schedule, some of this other language that I'm going to say a lot of people have tied it to the pandemic, but in my world, I've seen it taking place. I've seen business owners change to flex schedule, change dress codes, implementing other things before the pandemic. The thing to know about Gen Zs and their creativity, if they're in a role that doesn't offer much, start thinking about ways you can tap into them. Does your organization have a newsletter? Can they develop a system for something that you do in your business? But how can they get their creative juices flowing and get them in a room, whether it is a virtual room or get them in a room in person, but collaborate for solutions and get the minding power going to get options out there on the table. One of the things that I get a lot is the lack of eye contact. Um, there's a lot of people, not just younger generations, that can't make eye contact. People say, oh, because of the computer and the technology, and we're always on our phones, we're always texting and emailing or working on the computers. Eye contact is a learned behavior. So when we start thinking about how do we work with people and get that to be a comfortable space where they are willing to make eye contact, not demanding it, but leading by example. Are you super busy when you have somebody in front of you talking and you're, writing on a clipboard, or you're sending an email, you're on the computer and you're having this conversation? Pause. Power in the pause. Take a moment. Be involved in the conversation. Make eye contact. Don't stare. Staring's uncomfortable. Look away every now and again. Know your audience. Who's in front of you? Make it a safe space. So our Gen Zs, they are very collaborative. And I love that word because we can learn a lot from each other and come up with better ideas, more options when we're problem solving. Our next area is the communication piece. So as I type this, I would love to see, or as I talk about these things, I'd love to see in the chat room what tools, what values, what's important to you about communication. So when we think about traditionalists, face to face, they're not about the technology. And when you're talking to them, they like the stories. They like to actively listen, and they want you to actively listen. And they're listening to learn. So face to face, if you are working with a traditionalist, this is going to be the best way to communicate with them. Not always possible, yet when you can, best way. The baby boomers, pick up the phone and call. They like the phone calls. They value and respect traditions. They want to feel respected. And I'm hoping they want to respect others in return, because that is the trust and respect is the foundation of a lot of relationships, in my opinion, every relationship, whether it's work or personal. So establishing, how do I earn your respect? Here's how you earn mine. From the very beginning is a good way to go. And also, how do I earn trust? Because trust and respect are a little bit different. We can respect somebody because they hold a position, but we might not trust them. So our baby boomers like the phone. I think about this in the world of technology, in the emailing and the texting, or even instant messaging, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what happens is we get caught up in these emailing and texting wars. I'm going to email you a question. Well, then you're going to email me back because there's no clarity. And then I'm emailing you again, and it goes back and forth. Stop. Pick up the phone, make a call. You're going to save yourself time, energy, and get clarity on what you're looking for. Yet baby boomers still like the phone. Again, what end of the baby boomer range are you in? But it can also be what industry are you in? Or if you're communicating with people in other countries, the phone may not be the best solution. It is the preferred solution. When we think about Gen X is an emailing generation. And I caution you on this because not many people are sitting glued to their computers just waiting for that next email to come in. So if it's something of an urgent nature, we need to pick up the phone and make the call. Because if you send me an email, I might not look at it until 4 o'clock this afternoon when I'm checking emails. And if it was something that you needed from me before, then it's going to get missed. But when we also think about communicating, not just with the tools, but when we are communicating with Gen X, they like to have shared responsibilities, address their needs. How can I offer help? Right? They're looking for how do we take the pressure off of them? Again, I feel with all of them, all generations, it's communicating with respect. It's coming from an open mind and it's active listening. Our body language just tells a whole different story in our tone, but be conscientious and aware of those. Our millennials, they like the texting, the messaging. That's their preferred method of communication. Going back to my family, my millennials, they're in this thread. They have a thread of coworkers, they have a thread of family, they have threads, and they're emailing back and forth, and that's the preferred method of communication, which is very valuable when we start thinking about instantaneously. What do we need? And going back to the instant gratification that people are looking for, right? Our texting and our messages can give us that instant gratification. I was listening to a TEDx talk about breaking up with our cell phones because sometimes I feel a little tethered to it because somebody's going to call me, somebody's going to text me, I'm going to need to be on my phone and follow up with all of these things, but we need to establish boundaries. And boundaries, again, I feel are some of those cross-generational things that we can agree upon. When we think self-expression as something that millennials value in communicating, ask their opinion beforehand. Don't wait until a decision is made. We want to get their buy-in and their support, and also approach them about the brainstorming phase so they can be a part of solutions that are moving forward. Now, we all know that I can bring forth an idea in a meeting, and my idea isn't the one that's put into place, but at least I got to express that. And I feel valued because I was heard, appreciated, maybe understood, maybe not, but I was part of the solution. In our Gen Zs, their communication tools, it's the instant messaging. What platforms are you using at work? Are you using Teams? Are you using messaging from social media? Whatever the groups that you're set up in. They have Snapchat. They have a lot of things that I'm not even going to try to explain because I'm not necessarily sure I fully understand all the modalities out there when it comes to the instant messaging and all of those tools and resources. I'm trying to learn them because, again, I want to relate to the people that I'm working with and my family members and my friends because they're all generations. They like things fast. They value entertainment. Gamifying is a term that has come up a lot in the business world. How do we gamify things to hold people into the conversation? Get to the point when you're communicating with them. Be clear, be concise. Don't leave things gray. Help them know what you expect from them by when. So I'd love to just type in the chat, what are some of the emails I got, Teams chats. Thank you for sharing. So much time is spent looking for communication from someone. Was it a text? Was it a voicemail? Was it an email? Was it Slack? I love that, right? I'm getting anxious just thinking about that because there are so many different ways. If you've got 84 employees working in an organization, you can't have 84 different methods of communication. So we have to find the platform that we can all agree on to use, and maybe even establishing some of those guidelines that if it's an email that's gone back more than twice, let's pick up the phone. But when we look at productivity, when we look at different areas of not spending so much time searching, have a plan, communicate the plan, get buy-in and agreement with what that looks like, and move forward. I don't know if any of you may or may not remember, back in the day, it was memos. You'd type a memo and you'd put it in somebody's in tray or their folder. And it was, that's how we communicated with people, were memos. And you would always go to that. And that's where you would find information. Or it was phone calls, and people are like, well, I can't track what was said on a phone call. So there's value in the emails. I'm going to have a phone call and follow up with an email. But meet with your team, meet with the people that you're communicating with. How do we best find a solution that we can all buy into, so we're not in search of where was that message? How do I find it? So thank you all for typing in the chat some of your preferred methods of communication and how you like to. When I am doing this with an organization and in the team, we take a poll and we talk about who's in the room. There's 10 different questions on it. We talk about what are core values, how do I best work with you? And when we do this poll and we get the information, we compile it and we look at areas about how do we bring it together? How do we bring this information together and work together and communicate effectively and well and know who's on our team and adapt? Motivation is important. Really recognizing what motivates different generations. Also, again, without stereotyping, what motivates individuals is super important. Yet when we start looking at respect, the traditionalists, they like the respect, providing long-term value to an organization. Boomers, it's loyalty, teamwork, and duty. Our Gen Xers, they are motivated by diversity. A lot of times we see philanthropic endeavors in organizations. That's a lot where people are able to find where they can feel a part of something bigger. I talk to businesses, and if you don't have that philanthropic piece when you're developing your business plan, you don't have a complete business plan, because people want that sense of giving back and belonging. When we think about work-life balance, personal interests rather than the company interests, when we're looking at the Gen X, they're motivated by a diverse workforce, that work-life balance. Millennials, they like responsibility. So when we start thinking about, oh, millennials are lazy, they're just going to find a more effective way to get things done than I did. They can accomplish as much or more work in 40 hours than somebody can in 80 hours, because they're focused, they're driven, they're to the point, they're working on the work so that they can go home and do the things outside of work. Sometimes we use busyness, right? Busyness as a defined by I'm so busy, I'm so busy. But being busy and being productive are two different things. Millennials like unique work experiences. They don't necessarily want to do the same job over and over. They want some different different experiences, maybe some different things that they can work on. Gen Z, individuality, creativity, and again, diversity. There's many things that motivate different people in the workplace, and the way that you find out is simply by asking, right? Having dialogue, having conversation, communicate. So, how does an effective leader impact the varying generations? Now, just remember, a leader doesn't always have a title. You may not have the role of a leader, a manager, a CEO. You may not have anybody that directly reports to you, yet you can be a leader in your organization. When we start identifying what kind of a culture do we want in a multi-generational workforce, do we want that one of collaboration, communication, a fun place to work? Again, the respect. Challenge the stereotypes. Don't allow them to come in and have you forming opinions about that new hire that walked in the door that has maybe a young looking face, or ageism is a thing. The one that's coming in with gray hair that's maybe on their second career. Don't let those stereotypes, our assumptions, form our opinion of who's working with us. Recognize the strengths people bring to the table and appreciate the strengths. I appreciate the energy, the vitality. I appreciate the honesty, the trustworthiness. I appreciate the times that I need to be left alone to work and get my stuff done, and the times that I need to be in an open conversation. I appreciate the fact that sometimes I'm challenged by different ways of doing things and different approaches to business. Making sure we respect boundaries, setting expectations from day one. How do I best communicate with you? Mentorship programs are awesome. When we think about that person that's been around for a long time, that has all this knowledge that we can glean from, and vice versa, again, right? Bridging the gap. Using mentorship programs, taking somebody under your wing, showing them something. I have to tell you, going back to technology, having somebody show me shortcuts to make things easier, more efficient, more effective. That's a bonus. That's a win. I don't read every book cover to cover, and sometimes a great book title is an awesome reference. And I loaned it out before I had an opportunity to read it, but I had a book given to me that was What Got You Here Won't Get You There. That's why we need to come open-minded. That's why we have to be continuously learning and creating a culture that people want to stay. Because when we do not have a culture of a place people want to stay, it's going to impact us negatively, because the workforces are getting smaller. The jobs are plentiful. More options of going somewhere to work is huge. And some of those younger generations, even though they're in a smaller birth rate, they're looking at gig work, starting their own companies. So we have to have a culture where we want to value, respect, regardless of age and all the other things out there, so that we can have people help us keep our doors open and enjoy where they're working. That was a lot. I could geek out on so much more, but I value and respect time. But what generation do you associate with? Oftentimes I am a baby boomer, but I associate as a millennial. So we've got a second poll for those of you that would take a moment and just answer, what generation do you associate with? Sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, I've got an old soul," and yet they might be a Gen Z, and they can, based on their upbringing, even associate as a boomer. So what do you think? Give you awesome a moment to answer. And Sarah, when you stop
This,
to see,
yeah,
go
this
ahead.
is interesting because previously we had people identified by birth year in the Millennial and Gen X categories, and we are now showing in all categories. It's not letting me share it just yet, but we have a traditionalist, a baby boomer, 9 Gen Xers, 3 Millennials, and a Gen Zer. So I think this is fascinating.
I love it. I love it. I sometimes when I'm in the training room and I'll go around and ask what stood out to you the most about today's content. This is when we're face to face or in a more interactive Zoom. And I remember one woman saying, I think I understand my 13-year-old daughter now because we just skimmed the surface of some of those statistics. There are statistics out there about the percent of millennials that are still living at home with their parents and different things like that. So there we go. The poll results, they
Yep.
are a little
Here.
bit all over the place.
Yep.
I love it. I love
Very
it.
fun.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here today and learning about the different generations. I hope you found it beneficial. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Very grateful for Sarah inviting me to bring this information forward. And again, do your research, but sit down across the table from somebody, have a conversation, learn about them and how to work better. So, thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Lisa. This was really insightful. I look forward to sharing it with more of our members in the recorded format. And thanks to those of you who spent your lunch hour with us today. I hope you found it valuable. If you have feedback for me, go ahead and send it over at sarah.miller@sbm.org. Or if you have ideas for future webinars, please let me know that too. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks again, Lisa,
Thank
and
you.
hope to see you again soon.
Right. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone.